tech since the inception of the program, like a lot of folks here, and this is just an amazing time, things moving rapidly and by the week. I appreciate Peter putting me on this panel, particularly since the other folks are really some of the best minds in our industry. I think my role as a developer is to, give an in the trenches perspective of what we're seeing as some trends are evolving in states that we're touching or observing, how the priorities and administration of the program, some of the states would like to do it. As Jeanne mentioned, the vast majority of states have withheld their thinking until they got directives from the federal government. A handful have published their intentions, sort of their priorities, and some of the processes that they think they'd use. And we've been attending hearings and reading those papers. And we've had a number of other conversations with tax credit directors or heads of agencies, and I'll base my observations on those. And again, I think my role is to do it from a developer's perspective. Jeanne started to talk about one that, of course, is dear to our hearts, what's going to drive this process from the development community's perspective, and developer fees are part of it. Clearly, I think we're seeing in most of the states that have talked to us about how they intend to work with projects that touch ERA funds. They are looking at limiting or encumbering development fees in some way. Wide range of examples. I was reading on the flight out, rereading several of the states we've looked at, but Indiana has stated that they're going to expect a minimum of 50% deferred developer fee in projects. Virginia has set a dollar limit per unit on what development fees could be. You've got, although I'm not familiar because we aren't doing business in Washington, but I knew Washington folks would be here, I think the printed materials from Washington just have a blank and then percentage of fee to be deferred. So that's still evolving thinking. And in one of our favorite states, in Wisconsin, they've laid out an approach that would defer 50% of the developer fee until stabilization, another 25% until the project has proved itself out for 5 years. So whole wide range of going at it, but clearly that's going to be a trend that we'll just all have to balance off as we look at projects. I think that two things struck me as we've watched hearings involving these issues. One actually came from, I pulled the language up. I think that the thinking on the part of a lot of people involved in the program is, as Georgia listed in a paper they put out, they said projects that receive ERA funds will be thoroughly reviewed to ensure that there's not an undue enrichment to the applicants. And I think what we've got to really keep in mind is that these are stimulus funds, and it suddenly brings our industry and our programs into a whole new level of being under the microscope. I mean, all stimulus funds are going to be subject to real-time exposure on websites, a transparency that, we've had a transparent industry, but not many people have been paying attention. Now you're going to have real-time feeds into newspapers involving stimulus funds. And one tax credit director, Jim Chandler in Virginia, stated right out at their hearing that a reason for things like limiting developer fees was they didn't want to be the first agency to have a GAO report or a major newspaper story talking about an inefficient development of housing that enriched, some developer. So there's going to be I think a real strong consciousness there. The second observation or area that I think I would note is that most agencies talk about involving investors, the investors we've known, involving syndicators. Virtually every agency we've talked about or anything that's written makes some statement along those lines. And I think there's a varying degree of sincerity there. In Georgia, they have a statement right at the front of their principles that says they believe the continued inclusion of syndicators and funding the projects is a priority under ERA. So their intention is to prioritize and give first priority to any projects that have private syndicators in. Tennessee says the same thing, that they'll give priority to developments that demonstrate they have an investor. Then you've got sort of conversations. We've had a range of thoughts of other agencies, flipping all the way over, in my opinion, to Florida, the state I live in, where at the hearing about how to use ERA funds, they were just very plain about it. Steve Auger was very direct about it. He said, anybody who's not closed an 08 project at this point, we want those funds back. Because if you close a project 70-some cents with an investor and leave the money on the table that we could have sent back and got back from Washington, don't come to the state for any additional funding. Because in that math, there would be an awful lot of money left on the table. So they've just been very, very clear about that. The third sort of interest area or observation that I guess I would make is that, as Jeanne was starting to refer to, in states that are talking about it and have published papers, there is a lot of, you're starting to see how they would intend to play the role that they'll have to play as, syndicator, as we've all noted, and how they'll underwrite projects. And when I press in and ask folks, okay, what's your approach going to be? It's generally going to be, we're going to try to mimic the market, which then I think the second question, and I've got a wide variety of responses, is, well, which market are you going to mimic? Because we've had the market of the last 6-7 months or longer that has been onerous to the point, forget pricing, has been onerous enough in terms for applicants and developers that, it's past the point of being able to do a project. Or you have what people would loosely call the normal market of the way it was, back in the day, a year and a half, 2 years ago. And just to share a wide range of reactions when I've talked to EDs or tax credit program directors, ranging from one who just told me the other day that they clearly want to decide on the side of mimicking a more onerous market or a more demanding market, in that they didn't want there to be a very easy route for developers to go to the state asking for exchange and others. Over to a tax credit director who told me a couple of weeks ago in a meeting that, hey, trust me, when it comes down to getting your deals done, we want to get them done. We're not going to ask you for your firstborn and both legs as you've been asked lately. We're going to be asking you for more quote unquote normal terms. And I think all of that is is really something we're just all going to have to assess. As a developer, obviously we weigh out what the risks and rewards are. If there's going to be a limiting of some of the incentives for us to do projects, I would guess or hope, I'll add an opinion here, that the terms that the projects would be done under would be more understanding of the fact that we take fees to balance against risk. If you want to limit the risks for us a little bit more, probably can write and work with a different kind of compensation. So those are some of the initial sort of observations or trends that we see in the states we're talking to.
Do we have any questions before we move on?